Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Hey, podcast fans, this is Chris Webster, founder of the APN, and I just want to thank you for downloading this episode. Please consider becoming a member of the APN if you're not already, and helping us make more great shows and get them out to the world. Head over to ArchPodNet.com/members or click the link in the show notes. On to the show.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 193. On today's episode, I talked to Stephen Kershaw about his new book, The Harvest of War. Let's dig a little deeper. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. It's just me today. Rachel is not able to join me on this interview, but that being said, we have a great interview coming up. So we are talking to Steve Kershaw with his new book, The Harvest of War. And I wanted to say, before we start this, if you want to pause, this is a podcast, go check out the link in the show notes, maybe pick up the book, take a look at it a little bit, but we're going to talk about, motivations behind the book and putting it together. So Steve Kershaw, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you.
All right. Well, why don't you give us a little bit of an elevator pitch on the book right off the bat, just to get us started?
Okay, well, this is a book essentially about the Persian invasions of Greece at the beginning of the 5th century BC, which is a remarkable period of history, really. And it tells the story, in a sense, of a powerful and mighty but highly cultured empire that tried to attack and overwhelm the independent states of Greece. And the reasons it came to grief in that, the reasons the Greeks triumphed, and perhaps some of the human lessons that can be learned from all of that.
Well, what got you interested in this topic? What made you want to write this book?
Well, I've been interested in the world of the Greeks, particularly since I was a kid, really, since about 10 years old. But everything has sort of developed from there. But it's a topic that's long interested me. In a sense, it fell into my lap from the publisher's point of view. But it was I felt that it was always topical, worthwhile, and an interesting historical place to go.
So have you written on this topic before, specifically these cultures?
I have indeed, yes. My world is really the culture of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. So I live in their world, sort of physically and intellectually, if you like. Nice.
In writing this book, what goal did you set out to achieve, so to speak? You have some sort of an aim with the book, so you can figure out how you're going to write it, what your chapters are going to be about, things like that. But what was your real goal with writing this book?
Very much so. Well, I wanted to, if you like, tell the narrative of this mighty clash between civilizations in a way that was clear, that was interesting, that was perhaps surprising, and that would be, again, I think of value, because I think in learning about your history, you learn about yourself. I wanted to learn about myself.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a worthwhile endeavor for sure. You mentioned in the book, I mean, this is 2022 as we're recording this interview. It's 2,500 years since Athens fought off the mighty Persian Empire. And I'm reading this from the little thing that the publisher sent us. So, it's a good little synopsis here. But I'm just wondering, can you just tell us, I want to get into the book a little bit in the subject matter. What was the sort of state of being 2,500 years ago of Athens and the Persian Empire? What were they thinking? Why did they come together like this?
Yeah, Athens was newly democratic. It had, within a sort of generation or two, had finally crystallized the democratic system that we associate with it, very much so. It wasn't a major world power, but it had invented this and evolved this remarkable political system, which was unique in the ancient world at the time, that nobody else was really giving power to its people in the same way that Athens was. So they were doing something quite extraordinary, I think.
Sure.
Also in Greece, there were the Spartans, who are big players in this as well, who have a completely alien form of government and lifestyle to that of the Athenians. And the two of them are very much looking back on it anyway, are the dominant and most interesting city-states in Greece. And then to the east of them, you have the might of the Persian Empire, which it stretches all the way from what is now the coast of modern Turkey to India. It's a well-established empire. It's efficiently run by powerful kings. It's although the Greeks regard them as barbarians, they are far from barbaric. Really, they are highly cultured, literate, wealthy, and powerful people. But the two sides, I think, never really intended to go to war. But they end up being sucked into a conflict that does indeed bring them together in what's one of the most sort of fascinating and significant conflicts to come out of the ancient world.
I mean, back then it always seemed like it was either like land or trade. What set this conflict off?
Well, it's interesting actually that our one of our main sources for this is the Greek historian Herodotus, who lived close enough in time to be able to give us insights. He could certainly interview people who had been involved in it, and there's a number of things that he brings in. One of the things, which is typically Greek thing to do, I think, is to trace it back to mythology. So it all starts with the abduction of women in a sort of tit for tat thing that ends up with the Trojan War, and the Trojan War is essentially one of those things that in retrospect is seen as a great conflict between, if you like, the Western Greeks and the Eastern Trojans, who are sort of assimilated with the Persians in due course, because Persia comes to take over the territory that was once Troy. So there's that. But then the real trigger for it seems to be that the Persian Empire ruled a whole load of Greek city-states that are, as I say, not in what is now Greece, but what's now Turkey on the coast there. And these city-states became very disillusioned with Persian rule for various reasons. Their taxes were not put back into local circulation. Their governments were by people who are known as tyrants, who are not necessarily tyrannical in the modern sense, but they are, if you like, unconstitutional rulers who are backed with Persia at a time when places like Athens were becoming democratic. So there's if you like, there are political and economic reasons for a revolt against Persia, and these states were egged on to try to throw off the Persian yoke. And in that, the Athenians sent a number of ships, not very many, just 20 ships, to help that revolt and their sort of Greek kinsmen to throw off the Persians. And during that conflict, which failed, it was always going to fail in a sense. There was no way the Greeks could really liberate themselves from somewhere as powerful as Persia at that point. But one of the things that happened was that they burned one of the regional capital cities, Sardis. And in that burning of the city, this is by the Greeks, a particularly important Persian temple was destroyed. So this becomes, if you like, a cause for war, a cause for vengeance from the Persian king, who at that point is Darius I.
Okay, so Persia didn't like that too much, and they decide to respond in kind. But it sounds like at this time, from what you're saying, Persia is a much more powerful empire, so to speak, than the Greeks were. And I'm just wondering, take us. We'll get to this. We'll get to how the Greeks actually prevailed in this endeavor. Yeah. But take us through the next steps here. What did Persia do in response?
Yes, essentially, Persia decided that they needed revenge. I mean, you could also say that the Persian Empire was by default expansionist as well, so it's not averse to external conquests, but. Mm-hmm. Essentially, once the revolt has been put down, the Persian king Darius decides that he is going to invade Greece and essentially teach the Athenians a serious lesson. He's going to burn their temples in revenge for them burning his.
I think I read in there that the Persia actually goes through a regime change during this conflict as well, right? What is it? Is it pronounced Xerxes takes over at some point?
It does indeed, yes. So essentially, Darius I makes, if you like, the first invasion against the Greeks, which comes to grief from his point of view. Mm-hmm. Completely unexpectedly, and probably completely unexpectedly to everyone else, at the Battle of Marathon, in the year 490, mm-hmm. and where the Athenians win this extraordinary victory against his forces, to everybody's sort of shock and awe. And Darius is never going to take a setback like that lying down, but as he prepares to make a second go at Greece, he then has to face other difficulties within his empire, and he dies. Mm-hmm. So he never gets a chance to take his revenge. So the revenge project falls to his son, who is Xerxes, and mm-hmm. Xerxes puts in place a much bigger expedition, sort of learning from his father's mistakes, if you like, and bears down to Greece on Greece with utterly enormous forces.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and take a break and find out how the Greeks survived that on the other side. Back in a minute.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to the Archaeology Show, episode 193, and I'm talking with Steve Kershaw about his book, The Harvest of War, basically about the series of battles that took place between Athens and Persia 2,500 years ago as we're recording this. I say that on the anticipation that, this podcast is around for several hundred years, so we don't want it to be 2,500 years ago from then. But, who knows? Maybe we'll still be around. But when we left, the Persians mounted a big response to the defeat that they suffered at the hands of the Greeks. And this was King Xerxes, the next one, Darius' son, after he died. And how did this massive response? The Greeks were probably, even though they won the last conflict, what kind of time frame are we talking about between the end of the last battle that the Greeks actually won by surprise and the effort that the Persians are putting forward here? I'm wondering how long the Greeks had to kind of prepare for this and recoup.
Yeah, they have about a decade, so about 10 years. And the key thing that happens in that interlude is that they discover a very rich vein of silver in their mining districts. Athens has good silver mines, and they make an extraordinary choice. They could have just dished it out to the people of Athens and given everyone some cash, but what they decided to do instead was to build a large fleet of state-of-the-art warships that were called triremes, which was sort of sold to them actually because it was that they would be useful in a local war rather against the Persians. But they may have had one eye on the Persians as well. But essentially, the Athenians construct what becomes the biggest naval force in the Greek world at the time.
Wow. So that must have helped. Where did
it did?
So where did this conflict take place when Persia said, all right, we don't care what you guys have. We've got this huge force. Xerxes is like, let's send it to him. Where did they meet in battle here?
Yeah, the Persians bear down on the Greeks with a combined land and sea force that is utterly enormous, and multinational as well. It's represented by all the different nations of the Persian Empire, and they come in to Greece essentially from the northeast of Greece, and the Greeks try to use their own geography to help them. The Greeks are going to use the land and the sea and the climate and the weather to help them out. So it's their intention to fight in very narrow spaces where the overwhelming numbers of the Persians will be essentially irrelevant, and the Greeks can block mountain passes and narrow seaways to fend them off that way. And
I think I read in here, this was one of the places where, I mean, everybody's seen, well, not everybody, but there was a movie a while back, The 300, about the Spartans, right?
Indeed.
Is that where this tale comes from?
It is. Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's
wow.
Because essentially one of the first set piece battles is the Battle of Thermopylae, which is where those 300 Spartans fought heroically to pretty much the last one. Sort of fending off the Persians in a very, very narrow piece of land which was sort of trapped between the sea and quite precipitous mountains, and the Spartans. There were more than 300 people there. There were other Greek allies, but in the end, it was those 300 Spartans who sort of took the fame and actually took the defeat. It wasn't a victory, but it was one of those. It was one of those defeats that bought victory, I think, because the thing they could do was that they could delay the Persian advance, and the Persians always had difficulties supplying themselves. The Greeks could show that they could resist effectively. It could give confidence to the rest of the Greeks. And so in essence, it bought them time and morale, and I think the will to win.
Well, yeah, I was thinking on the flip side of that coin, it probably severely demoralized the Persians, even though they won, by the sheer losses that they suffered at this seemingly easy battle, right?
That's absolutely the case. Absolutely the case. And there are sort of remarkable moments where Xerxes, the king, who's with the expedition, is he can't believe that it's happened, really. He also has a Greek with him who's an ex-king of Sparta, and they have lots and lots of conversations. And the Spartan is always telling him, "Look, these guys are going to fight you. You know, they have this weird thing called freedom that they value above everything else. And no matter how many you've got, and no matter how hard you try to make your guys fight, these guys will always fight you, and they will fight to the last." And they did. So you have this sort of constant theme, I think, of Xerxes being told the truth that he doesn't want to hear and ignoring it, and of the Greek morale being crucial to their success, I think, and also perhaps an element of Persian demoralization at the same time. So Thermopylae, although a defeat and known for this heroic last stand, is essentially the first step towards the Greek victory.
All right. So were there other standout conflicts that took place that were notable in this, or was it just kind of a steady march to victory from that point on?
No, it was very much because the Persians were still coming. And the Persians moved on from Thermopylae, which is in the north of Greece. They just headed south to Athens and burnt it because the Athenians abandoned it. But the next phase of the resistance came at sea. The Greeks were able to, their fleet was undefeated, and essentially they knew that if they could defeat the Persian navy, then they'd have a chance of success, because the Persian army wouldn't be able to supply itself. So in the end, the great Athenian commander Themistocles tricksily lures the Persians into a conflict just off the island of Salamis, which is just off the coast of Athens. You can see it from the Athenian Acropolis. Again, into very narrow waters where the numbers of the Persian ships would actually play against them, and where the Greeks knew the local weather conditions. They knew exactly what the sea and the wind were going to do on that day, and they could deploy them to their advantage to almost literally turn the tide against the Persian invaders at sea.
Wow. So was that it for this? I mean, I would think that Persia would, after this defeat from the Greeks, I mean, they're still an empire. Was there repercussions, or is this kind of like the end of that story for a long time?
That's an interesting one. I think it's not the end of the Persian Empire. However, there's a really wonderful play by an Athenian playwright called Aeschylus, who fought at the Battle of Marathon, and he may have fought at the Battle at Salamis as well. But he wrote this fantastic play called The Persians, which rather extraordinarily tells the story of the invasion and the Battle of Salamis, but from the Persian perspective. And this is interesting. And as he spins it, it is a catastrophic defeat for the Persians, and particularly for Xerxes. But in reality, it's not really. Xerxes continues to rule for a very long time after this. He himself abandons Greece, but he leaves one of his commanders there, who fights another battle, actually, at the Battle of Plataea the following year, where again the Athenian land forces get the better of the Persians and drive them out of Greece for good. It's really interesting, I think, as a historian, that this is major events in Greek history, which are brilliantly written by particularly the historian Herodotus and also in Aeschylus's drama. But there's almost nothing at all from the Persian side. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Which you might expect in a sense, although it would be possible, I think, Xerxes was quite good at propaganda. There are some fantastic monuments in Persia, what's now Iran, with sort of trumpeting great Persian victories. And in a sense, Xerxes had half achieved his mission anyway. He'd burned Athens. He'd burned Athenian temples. So you could have had monuments that say, I, Xerxes, king of kings, lord of this, lord of that, most powerful this, that, and the other, burned Athens and showed them what's what. But you don't get that. It's in a sense, it's from the Persian side, it's relegated to a minor little excursion almost, and yet from the Greek and the Western perspective, it's one of the most important military campaigns ever.
I could see him spinning it, going, or not wanting to talk about it because they burned Athens, but they burned a city that had already been abandoned. So it's like, was anybody there to even care? You know what I mean?
It's very true. It's very true. Yes, there was just a few old men and people who were not able to get away. Yes, it wasn't a sort of heroic triumph in that sense. But
indeed. Well, it's really cool that we have written accounts. I mean, like eyewitness accounts of some of these battles and conflicts in this war, which is really cool. And as an archaeologist, especially somebody who works in the United States and a lot on prehistoric resources, I mean, we don't get written accounts of anything unless you can read rock art, which is really hard to do.
Absolutely.
But so I'm wondering, I mean, this is the archaeology show. Now you had a lot of written resources, even the play that you mentioned, Herodotus, of course. Did you have any archaeological resources or things that were, or sources that were built on archaeological data to pull from for this book?
Yeah, there is really, because I think some of the really interesting stuff is perhaps, if you like, environmental archaeology, because what's happened is that the landscape has changed, and there's been fascinating studies actually of the actual battlefield sites to try and establish how they would have looked, because the sea levels are completely different, and the relative land levels, and also I think so particularly recent investigations into the climate, the wind conditions, the sea conditions, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of really interesting, if you like, interdisciplinary activity going on there. And the other thing is that we do have sort of remains from the sites. So at the for instance, at the Battle of Marathon, there are the remains of Persian arrowheads and what have you, and indeed of the various contingents of their army there. So the sites have been excavated, and also dedications at Olympia. For instance, there are the Greeks monumentalized their victories and made dedications. So we have some fascinating and sometimes very moving artifacts that come from the archaeological explorations, for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and take our final break. And when we come back, I want to talk about what we can learn from the lessons of this historical series of events and how this plays out in modern times, so to speak. So let's do that on the other side of the break. Back in a minute.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to the Archaeology Show, episode 193. And again, we're talking to Stephen Kershaw about his latest book, The Harvest of War, published on October 4th, 2022 by Pegasus Books. And again, the link to that will be in the show notes, so check that out if you haven't done so already. All right, so I'm wondering, were you surprised by anything in your research and writing this? You've written about this before. You study this. You teach this. Was anything, when you were putting together this book, was it kind of collecting this story together in one place, and that was kind of like, the result of this book? Or was there anything that you just were like, I didn't expect that, in looking at your research?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. In a sense, I knew what to expect, but then
right.
There's always unexpected things. I think as you write and as you explore and as you dig further into things, you come across different themes, different ideas, different perhaps characters and things as your research pushes you into perhaps unexpected directions, I think. And I think one of the nice themes that emerged from it as I was writing anyway was sort of this idea of good advice being spurned and the disastrous consequences of that, which there are throughout the accounts that we have, the various Persian rulers are advised and warned and told this and that by various people, by their own people, by Greeks, by exiled Spartan kings, by also a culturally Greek queen as well, and a constant thing of just the leaders will not be told. They've got their own ideas about how it's going to go and how it should go. And there's people continually say, well, just hold on a minute. This is, you're underestimating your opposition, and they won't have it, but they learn their lessons the hard way.
It's funny though, because like nobody learns that lesson, right? Because you hear that throughout history. You get these leaders that are just like, I'm going to do this. And it's either my birthright or my mission, or it's honor above everything else, including the deaths of half of the people that live in my empire. And we're going to do this regardless. And nobody ever listens to the generals and the advisors and the others.
It's very true. And one of the other themes that comes through as well is that the Persian kings are mighty and powerful people, and they can exact horrific revenge on people who oppose them or resist them. So there's also this idea that many of their advisors or the people around them are not keen to if you like, to speak truth to power.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. So what are some of your, we talked about some of the things that surprised you. What are some of your big takeaways? What would you like people to get from this book? We'll talk about some of the more modern ramifications of this, democracy and all that. But what are some of your big takeaways from this?
I think I took away, which is slightly retrospective, I think, because of the things that are happening in the world when I was completing it and what have you, was this. I just think it's about the power of freedom and the wonderful way that can inspire and motivate people to achieve remarkable things. The Greeks themselves were actually, in their resistance, were not entirely unified. What we think of Greece was actually a collection of individual city-states who were very often quite happy fighting one another. And they operated on a principle of, my enemy's enemy is my friend. So there were plenty of people actually who were prepared to collaborate with the Persians. But within, if you like, the hardcore of Greek resistance, which sometimes had to be really cajoled and almost bullied into staying together, they had this ideal, I think, of freedom and the value of this and the rule of law and a sense of, if you like, of overarching Greekness that they developed. And that, for me, I think, is one of the powerful things that comes out of what is, again, at heart, an extraordinary tale of human endeavor.
Well, you mentioned the current world events at the time of writing this. At some point, throughout this book, we kind of talk about, and in the write-up that we were sent again by the publisher here, you talk about how this event that happened 2,500 years ago, how this, if it had gone another way, if the Persians had actually won and defeated Greece and maybe, taken it into the Persian Empire or whatever they would do with it, destroy it completely, something like that. If it had gone the other way, the world would potentially be a different place right now. Can you expand on that just a little bit and how this impacted us today?
Yeah, I think we always enjoy a little bit of counterfactual history, don't we? The big what ifs. It's a Scottish philosopher called John Stuart Mill in the back in the day said that the Battle of Marathon was more important as an event in English history than the Battle of Hastings, which was, the greatest battle perhaps in many ways on British soil. So, yeah, it's often felt that the world would certainly be a very different place from what it is now. I think it could potentially have killed off the Athenian democratic experiment. For a start, and not to say that democracy wouldn't have resurfaced somewhere else, but in the aftermath of the Persian invasions, those Athenian democrats became, I think, supremely confident in their own abilities. So all of the, what we think of perhaps as those amazing achievements of ancient Greece. So the drama, the architecture, the art, the philosophy, indeed the writing of history, is something that comes for the most part after the Persian invasions, and it happens at Athens largely. So I think the cultural environment of much of our world, certainly in the United Kingdom, in the United States, I'm sure could well have been very, very different, I think.
Well, that is yet one more good reason to go ahead and read this book, because there's just so much you can learn from it. Not just the story, but what it means for today. So, all right. Well, what else are you? I know you just published this book, so you're kind of riding that high right now. But what do you have? What do you have coming up in the future? Do you have anything else on the line right now that you're kind of outlining or putting together that you can talk about?
Nothing absolutely specific. I actually have although I'm just awaiting publication of a children's book on world mythology that's due out from Oxford University Press at unspecified date fairly soon. But so I'm just waiting for that to arrive, which I'm quite looking forward to. Aside from that, right now I'm just knocking one or two ideas about various possible projects, including one with Yale University Press about possibly something for a series of biographies of ancient characters. That's an attractive project. But other than that, I'm sort of embedded in my normal teaching at Oxford University and various other things. My sort of programs of lectures and accompanying cultural travel companies on sort of nice journeys around the Greek and Roman world, and looking at the sites and and exploring the history and the culture.
Well, I'm imagining you eventually hosting your own podcast on the Archaeology Podcast Network, the network I run, in which this show is housed, called Biographies of the Ancient World. I think that'd be a fascinating show.
Sounds cool. Sounds very cool. Sounds very cool.
I know, right? I'd listen to that. So
great. Yeah, but me too, probably.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, telling us about your new book. And this is a really cool story. And what I like about it is this adds a lot of substance to some of those things that a lot of us, especially students of history, have probably heard about, like the 300 and the Spartans and things like that, the Battle of Marathon. But this adds all the context around that and all the other things that happen. And of course, as everything in history, it's not just those things that happen. There's a lot of stuff wrapped up in that. And you really dive into it here. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
All right. Thank you. And next time we come back with this podcast, we should have Rachel back on. I don't think we have any interviews lined up, and we'll probably do another one of our news episodes, the first one in a long time. So we'll be back with that next week. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for listening to The Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.archpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArchPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcasting app. You could also consider becoming a member so we can keep content like this free and available to all. Check out pricing and info at archpodnet.com/members. Thanks again and have a great day.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.